Welcome to the chapter 16 of the discussion today, which is on power and politics. We are gradually entering into the more dynamic aspect of behaviors in the organization, where factors at the individual level, group level, and also at the organizational level interplay to give rise to the dynamics within the organization. And it is very important that the people within the organization know how to deal with these situations, what are the factors leading to these situations, because they ultimately affect the behavior and the performance of the people within the organization, and also the performance of the organization at large. So, today's chapter will focus on the power structure within the organization, and what are the role of politics in the organization, how politics has been played in the organization, and how do you recognize those things, and what are the ways of dealing with powers, and what are the sources of power, where do they come from, how does it affect behavior, politics, how it is played, and how we have to deal with those situations. So, the objective of today's discussion is to understand the concept of power, to understand the sources of power, to know what are the interdepartmental power, what is the illusion of power, what is the political strategies and tactics, what is the ethical issues, ethics, power and politics, using power to manage effectively. So, first we will start with the concept of power. So, the power and influence, these are two very related terms. So, and every interaction in an organization, every social interaction in the organization and social relationship can be interpreted as an exercise of power. So, a person A is said to have power over person B to the extent like when person A can influence the person B to act in certain ways, and the power is to that extent, like he or she can make person B to do something, like if left alone person B would not have done. So, influence is the exercise of the capability, like how to the extent like how one has a power of over the other person. So, we can see from the definition over here is influence is a transaction in which person B is induced by person A to behave in certain way. Person A has power over B to the extent A can get B to do something that B would have not done, otherwise would not do. So, the power is the capability and influence is the exercise of that capability. So, a person having power does not always mean like he exercises that power. So, when he exercises the power and tries to bring changes into somebody's ways of life or ways of doing things, then that is said like he is using his power to influence the other person. Leadership and power. So, leadership again focuses on the goal achievement, and power is again a means to achieve that goal. So, it requires that the followers are dependent on the leader to certain extent. So, and it is used to gain lateral and upward influences. So, leadership and power may not be with the same person in some cases. It's generally like it is so, like a person who has the leader has certain powers, but in some cases leaders may be ornamental leaders also, and the actual power of doing certain things lies with the some other person. So due to his social connections or expert power, so things vary, like it's not always like the person who is a leader is having the person who is enjoying all the power. So there is a contrast between leadership and power. So the how power can be used in the organization is it is used to maintain or obtain, and using power are all essential to influence the behavior. And the thing which determines which like to what extent power can be used to influence other person's behavior is defined by the dependency relationship between person A and person B. So, because a person A will enjoy power over person B only when the person B will be dependent on person A for certain reasons, and person A can control something, some aspect of what person B wants to have. So, this relationship of dependency and in the power and the position to control some of the important things which the other person wants are factors which determine to what extent power will be used in certain situations for influencing behavior. Now, the sources of power, or where does power come from, are mainly sources of like first is the interpersonal power. So, interpersonal power, French and Raven have given 5 power bases, and they are like legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, expert power, and referent power. I will repeat, it's like legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, expert power, and referent power. We will look into each of these separately in details. Like when we are talking of legitimate power, it is the power which one holds because of the position, a particular position held in the organization. So, this is also called authority or the right to command. So, characteristics of organizational authority are like it is invested in a person's position. So, again it is accepted by subordinates, and its authority is used vertically and it flows from top down. So, these define legitimate power. Now, when we are talking of power and a person having authority over the other person, does not really mean like whatever the person speaks of, the person A will be agreed by person B, even that will be agreed by person B, even that to the extent like whether you feel like okay, you are like differing or not differing to it. These, whether we differ or do not differ from what person A tells to do, is determined by the zone of indifference. So, zone of indifference is where there is no difference between what person A tries person B to do and the way that is expected to be done, and how person B thinks, like when it is to be done, how it is to be done, etc. So, more or less, like if we call in one sentence, it is acceptable to person B. So, that is what, like giving an order does not always mean that all orders will be acceptable to the subordinates. So, only those will be acceptable and readily followed which will lie within the zone of indifference. If it lies outside the zone of indifference, and so it may be the case that orders are given but not always followed. And so the zone of indifference is either like broader or narrower based on like based on certain factors like cultural factors also may influence whether this zone of indifference is wider or narrower. Second is reward power is based on person's ability to reward a follower for compliance. So, it occurs when someone possesses resource that another person wants to get and will exchange that resource for certain behavior. So, what happens like it suppose a legitimate power. So, if you are in a position to reward someone, then what happens, like that itself makes the person dependent on you and to do things as you want that person to do. Next comes is what is called coercive power. We can understand from the word coercive is the means it's to punish. So, coercive power is based on fear. So, it can come from legitimate power, it can come from informally defined power also, like fear of rejection by workers. Next is important is expert power. It is based on the individual's special and valued expertise on certain things. The lower the substitutability of the expertise, the greater is the expert's power. Referent power is based on individuals' way of attracting people or guests, and it is based on individuals charisma. So, and it is a particular style of attracting people. So, you can understand like legitimate power, reward power and coercive power, all these things comes from the organization, but expertise and referent power, these are within the individual and are derived from personal characteristics, traits of the individual. So, all these 5 bases of power can be either used singly or it can be used as a mix and match. So, and the use of one power may affect the perception of the other power basis. So, like research shows legitimate and reward powers are positively related and coercive power is negatively related to legitimate and reward power. When we are talking of power, and so power in groups itself, the groups per se, the formation of group itself gives rise to certain power. And so, in this section we are going to consider that. The first is that power derived from group is called coalitions. So, coalitions are clusters of individuals who temporarily come together. The word temporarily is important. Who temporarily come together to achieve a specific purpose. It seeks to maximize their size to attain the influence. So, coalition, like what happens if they form small boards in governments and discuss and all these things to support their objectives. So, what happens in organizations to work for a particular purpose, so and in which there is like high task and resource interdependency. So, what happens is people generally form coalition, so to get their objectives done. So, this is where the importance of coalition is. So, next we come to another power in the which takes place of this group formation is sexual harassment. So, this happens because of unequal power in the organization. So, unwelcome advances, requests for sexual factors, favors and the other verbal or physical conduct of sexual nature, then which is perceived as abusive or hostile by the person. So, these are again powers which generate out of being in group. Structural power is the power which is defined by the structure itself. So, structure, what happens is the control mechanism which helps to facilitate certain interactions in the organization, but which does not nurture other interactions in the organization. So, so by the mere presence of the structure itself, some mere presence of the structure itself, it determines like who is placed above whom and what is the relationship, who is more closely placed, who is more distantly placed, and all these things give rise to power, because structure creates formal power by specifying certain individuals to perform specific jobs and make certain decisions. Other forms of structural power are like resources. Power stems from like access to resources. One who has more resource, more information, more support and more ability to get cooperation, then what happens, like due to the position of these resources, this person becomes more powerful than the other person. Now, when you tell like the top manager has more power over a lower level employee, means he is utilizing all these ability to control these resources into lower managers level of functioning gets affected by it. Decision making power is another power which is the expertise to make decisions in the organization and influence the decisions of the people in the organization. C is information power where it power generates from the information possessed by certain individuals and groups and the access to those information. So, this is very important. So, access to information and also the position of information are the important factors for information power, because it influences the basis of decision making. When we are talking of interdepartmental power, so we are talking of powers which can be observed in between two departments. So, generally what happens, subunits departments get control over strategic contingencies, resources, etc., and they do not like want to share it with others of the conflicting department, and so like this is called interdepartmental power, which is arrived at by controlling some of the strategic contingencies. And it is also dependent on the substitutability, like if one element is not there in the whole process, then whether that is substitutable or not. If it is not substitutable, then the person or the department in possession of that power is more powerful than the other department. Coping with uncertainty. So, three types of coping strategies are like coping by prevention. So, we will try to cope by saying like, okay, nothing is going to happen, and we will reduce the probability of that happening. Coping by information is we try to get as much of information as possible by either by statistical technique also or by surveys, etc., to deal with the uncertainties in a much better way. And the third is of course like the coping by absorption, where we try to do is we try to directly deal with the uncertainty and at the time when it affects the department. So, or the subunit. So, these are the three main points, like first is coping by prevention, second is coping by information, and third is coping by absorption. The interdepartmental conflict is also influenced by centrality. So, the degree to which the subunit is central to the organization's workflow is a factor which determines um, which determines the situations, and like, and in other words this is called the centrality of the unit. So, research shows that centrality can be a significant source of subunit power, because because of its effect in substantially affect other units. So, due to that process, like if it is a very centrally held department, and it can influence many other situations pertaining to the other units or the unit in discussion per se, then we have to be careful about it. Substitutability, the ability of other subunits to perform the activities of a particular subunit. So, the lower unit substitutability, the greater is the power. So, because one substituted means your work can be done by some other person, but once it is not substitutable, means you are a very important resource for the organization, and you can be a source of power. Third concept is that of empowerment. In empowerment, what happens? It is a feeling of increase of self-efficacy, and self-efficacy amongst the members, and through the identification of the conditions that foster powerlessness, and through the removal by both formal organizational practices and formal and informal techniques of providing efficacy information. So, empowerment is where I try to empower a person, and he or the she has to understand also, like I can do, I can complete, or I am good at this task or not. So, these particular ideas about oneself or oneself, in the sense the group self, also determines whether that will get empowered, and whether that will lead to the centrality or not, and whether it will lead to perception of power or not. Empowerment, as we have seen, is not universally embraced by everyone. This is what we have to be very careful about. So, if managers sometimes see like they are at the fear of like loss of power, control and authority. So, and then managers also fear that there will be loss of something. Then the students and like the employees are sometimes not able to make proper decisions, and they do not want to make decisions, and they are not responsible also. So, empowering was tried once and it has failed, and how much information to share, to what extent. So, this leads to problems like, should we share all information at all levels to the employees, or no, there should be some decisions regarding it. So, and lastly, very importantly, like not everyone wants to be empowered. If we want, okay, we have this group of people and we get this person empowered, doesn't always mean that the person wants to get empowered. So, all these factors may lead to why the concept of empowerment is not widely accepted. The stages of empowerment are identifying first the conditions that may lead to members' feeling of powerlessness. So, giving of empowerment style like that of participative management and merit pay, then and providing information to subordinates to create their feelings of information of self-efficacy, like whether to what extent they feel like they can do certain things, and feeling of empowerment by the organizational members. So, and then it is like it is not for everybody, and empowerment feelings have to be translated into behaviors, because there may like the gap, because people may not want to get empowered, as I told, like it may not be for everybody. So, it has to translate into a particular behavior which shows, which expresses like that empowerment has been done. Next we come to tactics, power tactics within the organization. So, where this is the process by which people translate their powers into influential tactics, and these are like legitimacy, rational persuasion, inspirational appeals, then consultation, then pressure, ingratiation, coalitions. So, these are again part of discussion of the like impression management techniques to some extent. So, what we can see from this diagram is individual factors like high self monitors, internal locus of control, high EMAC personality, organizational investment, perceived job alternatives, then expectation of success, all these, and the organizational factors like reallocation of resources, promotion opportunities, trust, and role ambiguity, unclear performance, etc., etc., zero sum reward practices give rise to both low end and high end political behavior, and these may again lead to high outcomes like rewards and averted punishment, etc. So, the factors influencing political behavior are both at the individual and organizational level, and it can ultimately lead to a behavioral outcome which is either in terms of rewards gain or averted punishments. Perception of organizational politics is how you see it in the organization is it's decreased job satisfaction, then increased anxiety and stress, increased turnover and reduced performance. So, these are some of the effects, like what happens if there is too much of organization politicking. When you are talking of influence, influencing the behavior and like which power tactics to be used, it is it's like the sequence is very important. So, what we will try to do is start from the softer ones and move towards the harder techniques. So, then is skillful use of a particular tactic, then relative power of the tactic user. Some tactics work better when applied downward or upward. So, the type of request to that tactic, is the request legitimate? If it is not, then how it is consistent with the tactics value, etc. The culture of the organization. The culture of the organization affects again the choice of the tactic, and this culture can also be of two types: culture of the organization per se, culture of the team. So, culture of the country that the person is working in. So, these again has a this again influences, like the local values influences the way we can use the power tactics over one another. So, these are the factors which influences how effective will be the power tactics. Illusion of power is where some people create like the illusion that they are more powerful than the others. So, the individuals who are perceived to be having more power can later on do certain things for the organization or substantially influence others. Power in action is politics. Political behavior. So, these are certain behaviors which are not required as a part of the formal role that anyone plays in the organization, but it influences the or attempts to influence the it attempts to influence the distribution of advantages and disadvantages within the organization. Next is like when you are talking of political things, so it is the formal structure, the formal role requirement does not require this type of behavior, but somewhere this creeps in and influences the whole lot of behavior pattern. And these could be again of two types: legitimate political behavior and illegitimate political behavior. So, legitimate political behavior, it is though undesirable, but still it is normally within somewhat like within a normal range of normal everyday politics, like meager politics what happens in the organization. So, legitimate political behavior is thus as defined by the structure. Illegitimate, when you are talking of, it is violent behavior. Illegitimate is violent in nature, and it's extreme political behavior which violates the rules of the game, and it tries to follow its own pattern. So that is not something which is allowable in the organization. So politically oriented behavior is designed to benefit the individual and subordinates, and often at the it's not defined by the legitimate power system. It takes care of the individuals or subunits benefit at the cost of the benefit of the organization, and it's intentional and designed to acquire or maintain power. So politically orientation of the organization is somewhat which is like we have to be careful about, and because sometimes what happens, like organizations have groups which function for their own purpose, for their own benefits, and not for the benefit of the organization as a whole. Play politics is an important area of power and politics in the organization, and of course the first important thing is that of game playing. So these game playing according to Mintzberg could be of various nature and for various purposes. So to like resist authority, it is the insurgency game. To counter the resistance of authority is another game. So to build power base is again the sponsorship game and coalition building game, and they defeat rivals. Then see, it's talking of like to defeating rivals and bring about organizational members. So who can bring about change, we like that of whistleblowing. So these are certain things like how we go about game playing. The insurgency game is played to resist authority, that is in order to reprimand an employee, and the foreman does it ineffectively. So these kind of things. Political tactics again are consultation, rational persuasion, inspirational appeals, ingratiation, we have already talked about it, legitimating personal appeals. So coalition techniques, pressure techniques, too long a list, but these factors are used to get things done in an organization. And you see like these have different applications according to different situations and purposes. Exchange tactics is again like where we promise that the compliance will lead to reward. So some tactics again will work better in some situations while we are talking of upward downward influence, and like managers prefer consultation, personal rational persuasion, etc., and inspirational appeals. So defensive behaviors again are like reactive and protective behaviors to avoid action, blame or change. Avoiding action is what we do is over confirming, buck passing, playing dumb, stretching and stalling. Avoiding blame is buffing, playing safe, justifying, scapegoating. Avoiding change is prevention and self-protection. Some impression management techniques, like, and why we are discussing impression management over here is also impression management is an important way of dealing with organizational situations and getting favors from the organization. So, we can take it to be a political behavior also. So, conformity is agreeing with someone else's opinion in order to gain his or her approval. So, excuses, apologies, acclimatization, then flattery, flavors. So, favors, association, special group association, flattery, these factors are done to form the first image very carefully in another person's mind, so that they get somewhat affected or carried away by what we want to do, we want to get from the other party. While talking of making ethical decisions, we should be concerned about utilitarian outcomes, the greatest good for the greatest number, individual rights, respect rights of free content, free speech and freedom of conscience. Distributive justice is have equitable and fairly distribution, and this distribution is not arbitrary in nature. So, when behavior cannot pass like these three criteria, like utilitarian outcomes, individual rights and distributive justice, then it is not somewhat which is ethical in nature. How do we use power to manage effectively? Is like by recognizing like there are various interest level in the organizations, and these interest levels, various interest levels are the sources of are the pockets where powers reside, and either maybe due to the structure or due to expertise or due to like you can reward or some other reason. So, and we have to like through the power that we have, any of the 5 powers that's mentioned, we need to reach all these people with different interests. Knowing what position relevant individuals and groups hold with respect to issues important to oneself. So, with whom I am sharing the power, with whom I have to negotiate, all these things we have to do a background study before we go to interact with the other person. Understanding that to get things done one must have power, and in the case of those who oppose, one must have more power than they do. So, recognizing the strategies and tactics through which organizational power is developed is also very important. So, as a question we will come to discuss as what is the concept of power, what are the sources of power in an organization, what is politics, what are the factors that influences political behavior, what are the political strategies, then relation between ethics, power and politics, then short notes on defensive techniques and impression management. So, what we can find over here is maybe the questions are not too many, but questions are in depth, and you need to, like, while answering these questions, be very careful about like the 2-3 factors influencing the choice of power and the strategies, political strategies, and how it is affecting both the people and the functions of the organization. Thank you.